Philip Deen Hancock was born in 1964 in Oklahoma City. He was the older of two brothers. The younger, born with cerebral palsy after a complication during birth, depended on him early. Hancock stepped into the role. Protective, loyal, always watching out. But the home they lived in wasn't safe. Their father was aggressive. Their mother fled at one point just to keep them alive. Church gave them some structure, Sunday mornings at the local Methodist congregation. But outside those walls, Hancock was already slipping. He hung around salvage yards, started fighting. By the time he turned 18, he had already seen too much. Then came May 26, 1982. A man named Charles Lester Warren. A confrontation. Hancock said Warren threatened him, hit him. Hancock was scared, and he had a gun. One pull of the trigger. Warren didn't survive. Hancock faced serious charges. He said he acted to protect himself. The jury agreed it was not planned. They found him guilty of a lesser charge. He got the minimum sentence of 4 years. He left prison in under 3 years on parole. That case set a pattern. Hancock would later say the same thing. He was just defending himself. Some questioned whether his difficult home life should have triggered support before things escalated. On April 27, 2001, Hancock was 37. He went to Robert Lee Jett Jr.'s home. Jett was accused of supplying substances to Hancock's then-girlfriend. Also, there were Jett's friend James Vincent Lynch III and a woman nicknamed Smokey Tarp. What began as an argument over cigarettes got out of hand. Hancock said Jett pulled out a gun. During the struggle, Hancock took the gun and fired. Tarp said Jett had forced Hancock into a metal cage and struck him with a pipe. Hancock said he feared for his life. He shot Jett and Lynch inside the house, then he chased Jett into the yard. Jett was hurt and said, "I'm going to die." Hancock replied, "Yes, you are." Jett then lost his life. Hancock was on the run for about a year. In March 2002, police arrested him on weapons and substance charges. Forensic tests later linked him to those shootings. On September 30th, 2004, a jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree wrongdoing. On October 25th, 2004, Judge Susan P. Caswell handed down the harshest penalty under state law. Throughout the trial, Hancock kept saying he acted to protect himself. Prosecutors pointed to his changing stories and the backyard shooting as signs he planned it. His lawyers argued they were not at their best during the trial. They said they had their own struggles with substance use and missed key evidence. In a plea for mercy on November 8, 2023, Hancock again said Jett and Lynch had trapped him and beaten him with a pipe. He asked to live. 3 lawmakers spoke up for him. They said anyone in his place would have fought back. The Pardon and Parole Board voted 3-2 to spare his life. But Governor Kevin Stitt waited until the last moment and refused to change the sentence, even after the time passed. On November 30th, 2023, Hancock lost his life at the state prison in McAllister. Reports say he stayed calm until the end. When the curtains opened, he joked, "Where are my enemies at?" His final request was simple: a bucket of fried chicken, dark meat only, and a root beer. As he lay down, he thanked his legal team. He said, "I want to thank you all for your support. You went above and beyond." He held to his claim that he acted in self-defense. He hoped people would remember his story and work to clear his name later. His last words about the Attorney General's office were sharp. He said, "They're vile. They lack honor." The next individual built an empire of fear, then tried to break it. Stanley Tookie Williams III was born in 1953. His father left when he was just 1 year old. He was raised by his teenage mother, Louisiana Williams. In 1959, they moved to South Central Los Angeles. He spent much of his youth on the streets. He earned money by betting on dogfights, street fights, and cockfights. By his teens, he had been expelled from high school. He was known across the neighborhood as a fierce fighter. At age 17, he and Raymond Washington started a group called the West Side Crips. It began as a small circle of friends. It soon grew into one of LA's most feared gangs. They recruited new members by challenging rivals to open-air fights. As their reach grew, other gangs formed a rival alliance known as the Bloods. In late February 1979, Williams took part in a holdup that escalated. Details about that incident are scarce, but it led to serious harm for 2 people. Then, on the morning of March 11, 1979, he and an accomplice broke into the Brookhaven Motel on South Vermont Avenue. Williams carried a 12-gauge shotgun. He fatally shot 67-year-old Sai-Shai Young, his wife Yen-E Yang, 63, and their daughter Ye Chen Lin, 43. Afterward, they stole about $50. During his 1981 trial, Williams faced 4 counts of first-degree homicide, plus charges of theft and use of a firearm. The prosecution showed that shotgun shells from the motel matched his weapon. Williams argued there were no fingerprints, no red boot prints, and no eyewitnesses directly linking him to the motel shootings. Still, the shell match was enough. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He appealed through state and federal courts. In 2002, the Ninth Circuit upheld his conviction but suggested that mercy could be considered. By November 2005, all appeals were exhausted. Williams then asked Governor Schwarzenegger for clemency, citing his personal growth and work behind bars. In prison, Williams wrote 8 children's books warning against gang life. His writing led to a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. In interviews, he admitted his troubled past and expressed deep regret. He said, "I have a despicable background. I was a co-founder of the Crips. I was a nihilist." He added that he had outgrown that mindset and embraced faith. His plea for mercy drew worldwide attention. Activists and celebrities, including Jesse Jackson, spoke on his behalf. Williams felt the world judged him more for his gang past than for the 4 motel homicides. Just after midnight on December 13, 2005, his sentence was carried out at San Quentin State Prison. He was 51 years old. Prison staff said he remained calm and upbeat in his final hours. He ate only oatmeal and milk and declined any special meal request. He also declined a spiritual advisor but spoke of faith and peace until the end. Williams made no final statement at the prison. Earlier that evening, he had told a radio host he did not fear passing into the unknown. His silence at the very end may have reflected that acceptance. Mobsters go down all the time, but only the next one went out like this. Louis Buchalter was born in 1897 on Manhattan's Lower East Side. He grew up in a Jewish family and attended the Rabbi Jacob Joseph School. He did so well there that he made the honor roll. When his mother moved to Arizona for her health, his sister Sarah took charge of his care. Despite her efforts, he drifted into illegal activity while still a teen. At age 18 in 1915, he was arrested in New York for breaking and entering and for fighting, but those charges were later dropped. A few months later, he moved to Connecticut. In early 1916, another breaking and entering charge landed him in the Cheshire Reformatory. He stayed there until mid-1917. Back in New York that year, he was sent to Sing Sing prison for stealing large sums of money. After serving 18 months, he was moved to Auburn. He got out in January 1919, but returned to Sing Sing in 1920. That time, he had tried another break-in. He served until March 1922. Once free, he joined a network that shook down unions and ran illegal trade operations. He teamed up with Jacob Gura Shapiro. Together, they skimmed millions from New York's garment, trucking, and produce unions. They did this by offering protection, breaking strikes, and taking payoffs. In 1931, Buchalter, Meyer Lansky, and Charles Lucky Luciano set up what they called Murder, Inc. This group enforced orders for the organized underworld. It relied on a mostly Jewish team based in Brooklyn. Buchalter himself gave the order in October 1936 to remove Joseph Rosen, a union member who disagreed with the bosses. That decision would cost him later on. Federal agents then pinned him down for running illegal substances and for getting in the way of justice. He got 14 years at Leavenworth Prison. In April 1940, he picked up another long sentence for shaking down unions. Soon after, he faced charges over Rosen's case. Those charges rested on the testimony of Abe Relis and Albert Tick-Tock Tannenbaum. On May 9, 1941, he stood trial in Brooklyn. Witnesses said he had ordered Rosen's removal. The jury met for months and finally, in the early hours of November 30, 1941, found him guilty of first-degree homicide. On December 2, 1941, he and 2 associates, Emmanuel Mendy Weiss and Louis Capone, were sentenced to the ultimate penalty. He appealed his sentence, but in October 1942, the New York Court of Appeals upheld it by a 4-3 vote. He fought to stay in federal custody, hoping to delay what was coming. In January 1944, that effort ended. 3 final orders went out for Capone, Weiss, and Buchalter in March of that year. Rumors swirled that Buchalter had offered to share names of powerful public figures in exchange for leniency. He claimed he could name a top official, a labor leader linked to Rosen's end, and a well-connected relative fronting for the underworld. Shortly after midnight on March 4, 1944, they shared the same meals. Dinner was roast chicken, shoestring fries, and salad. Earlier that day, and again on March 2nd, they had a steak and fries lunch. When the time came, Buchalter wore his own gray trousers, a white shirt, gray socks, and tan slippers. His pants were slit at the knee for the procedure. He did not pray or speak. 36 witnesses watched as he faced the electric chair at 11:16 p.m. He remains the only underworld boss in U.S. history to meet his end that way. He spoke no final words. He did not admit regret. He did say once, outside the proceedings, that he had not offered information in exchange for any change in his sentence, but that account varies by source. The next man ran a Brooklyn cafe. But what was really cooking inside changed everything. But before we move on to the next case, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Louis Capone was born in 1896 in Naples, Italy. As a child, he moved with his family to Coney Island, Brooklyn. He grew up in a tough part of town. Later, he settled in Brownsville. He was known for his neat appearance. He had clear blue eyes. He also had a broken nose from street scuffles. He ran a pastry shop in Brooklyn. That cafe became a meeting place for local young men. Two of them were Abe Relays and Harry Maione. He won them over by giving them free treats. From there, he rose to become a supervisor in Murder, Inc., the mafia's feared enforcement arm under boss Louis Lepke Buchalter. Louis was the child of Italian immigrants. He grew up in a close-knit family in Brooklyn. We know little about his parents or siblings. Later, he married Sophie. They had 3 children. At his passing, Sophie was left alone to care for them. He kept his personal life private. Instead, he became known for harsh deeds in public. Capone first got involved in underworld activities through labor rackets and usury rings. He had ties to Detroit's Purple Gang. He took part in loan sharking and union schemes. He worked alongside mobster Joe Adonis. His real rise came after the Castellamarese War ended in 1931. With support from Albert Anastasia and Lepke, Capone organized fatal acts. He picked targets. He scouted locations. He arranged all details. He led squads made up of Jewish and Italian criminals, including Relays and Maione. In 1936, Capone arranged the slaying of Joseph Rosen. Rosen owned a candy store. His ties threatened Buchalter's interests. Capone set up transport and meeting spots. The 3 who carried out the act fired on Rosen 17 times in his Brooklyn shop. Then, in 1939, he mixed up another target. He identified publishing executive Irving Penn instead of Philip Orlovsky. Penn was shot on a Bronx street. Capone had chosen him to shield the real target. These acts kept mob bosses protected from informants and rivals. They also enforced loyalty and mob power. In 1940, Abe Relays turned state's witness. He revealed inside details about Murder, Inc. Early in 1941, Capone was charged for Penn's slaying. Later that year, he was tried and found guilty for Rosen's case. He faced the state's ultimate penalty under New York law. The trial began in late 1941, with Capone standing alongside Weiss and Buchalter. They all faced the same charge. On November 30th, 1941, a jury found them guilty of first-degree slaying for Rosen's case. Over the next 2.5 years, they appealed their convictions. Their case went through state and federal courts. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to intervene. A plea for mercy to Governor Thomas E. Dewey was also turned down. On the night of March 4th, 1944, Capone, Weiss, and Buchalter were brought to Sing Sing Prison's chamber. They stood within 25 feet of the punishment chair. They each received the same meals twice that day: steak and fries for lunch, then roast chicken and potatoes for dinner. Some say this was a ritual. At 11:02 p.m., Capone was led into the chamber first. His heart was weak from stress and age. He was strapped into the chair. He prayed silently as metal bands were attached to his head and limbs. He said nothing out loud. Witnesses said his lips moved, but no words came. 3 minutes later, at 11:05 p.m., he passed away. Afterward, Louis Capone was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Brooklyn. A funeral mass was held at Our Lady of Solace Church. His funeral procession drew a large crowd of local residents. His widow Sophie, his children, and his brothers were left to grieve his passing. At 47, his life ended. He had gone from cafe owner to a top overseer in the mob's enforcement arms. What follows is an enforcer who used everyday tools, ice picks, fire axes, to carry out his missions. The next man's methods were gruesome. His motive, pure strategy. Harry Strauss was born Harry Ostrovsky in 1909 in Brooklyn. His parents, Jacob and Yetta Ostrovsky, came from the Russian Empire and arrived in New York City in 1914. They first lived on the Lower East Side. Later, they moved to the Bronx. Harry grew up with his sister Fanny and brothers Hyman, Alex, and Sam. His father worked for the city's street cleaning department. When Harry was still a child, his father passed away in an industrial accident. Life on the Lower East Side was harsh. Emma Strauss, his mother, remarried after Jacob's accident. Harry had already learned to look out for himself. He left school at 15. Soon he began taking part in small thefts and other unlawful deeds. He also sold substances. Police records show he was arrested 18 times. Yet he avoided long jail terms until he joined the enforcement wing of a major underworld network. In the early 1930s, Strauss moved deeper into that network. He became known as Pittsburgh Phil. He dressed sharply and used everyday tools, ice picks, rope, fire axes, to carry out his orders. His reputation grew for being efficient and ruthless. He planned every step carefully. Strauss later said part of the thrill came from the challenge. He compared himself to a ball player getting practice before making it to the big leagues. He hoped his record of successful assignments would earn him a spot with the most powerful groups. On one occasion in Jacksonville, Florida, Strauss scouted a target in a darkened movie theater. He had no weapon on him. He spotted a fire axe tucked behind a wall panel. He had intended to strike there, but his target moved to another seat. Strauss abandoned the plan and flew home. This showed how he preferred to improvise with whatever he found nearby, rather than carry a weapon that might be traced back to him. Estimates vary, but Strauss may have been involved in more than 100 fatal assignments. Some accounts put the number as high as 500. His methods were chilling. Ice picks through ears, burying people alive, suffocating, drowning, shootings, even burning. One of his early victims, Walter Sage, once Strauss's roommate, was found with an ice pick wound and tied to a pinball machine in a lake. When the body surfaced days later, Strauss learned to puncture the victim's stomach to prevent floating. His most notorious assignment involved Irving Puggy Feinstein on September 5, 1939. Feinstein was a bookkeeper who tried to claim territory he didn't control. He resisted when Strauss and others came to confront him. They overpowered him, bound him with rope, and left his body in an empty lot, where it was set on fire. Everything changed in 1940 when Abe Kid Twist Reles, a close associate, agreed to speak with authorities. His testimony named Strauss and other leaders in many fatal assignments. Strauss was arrested and charged with several counts, including the case of Feinstein. At his trial, Strauss tried to appear unwell and confused. He grew a long beard, let his hair go unwashed, and chewed on his lawyer's briefcase strap. He hoped the court would declare him unfit to stand trial. That effort failed. On September 19, 1940, a jury found him guilty of first-degree charges. Strauss and another enforcer, Martin Bugsy Goldstein, were both given the harshest sentence available under New York law. They appealed, but on April 25, 1941, the state's highest court upheld the verdict. He was sent to Sing Sing prison. There, he remained on row. He continued to act erratic, keeping up his insanity routine. Yet no reprieve came. On June 12, 1941, Strauss faced the prison's electric chair, known as Old Sparky. There is no record of his final meal or his last hours. That detail was never kept. Late that night, 2 jolts of electricity ended Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss's life at age 31. He shared that fate with Martin Goldstein. Both men met the same penalty for their roles in the Feinstein case. The next man's nickname was a joke. His reputation wasn't. Harry Happy Maione was born in 1908 in Brooklyn, New York. His nickname Happy was ironic. His face carried a permanent scowl. He had an older brother, Louis the Duke Maione. Later, he had a son, Albert Maione, who worked with a well-known New York family. He also had a daughter, Barbara, born shortly before his passing. As a young man, Maione led the Ocean Hill Hooligans. They were an Italian street gang in Ocean Hill, Brooklyn. In 1931, he and Frank, the Dasher Abandando, took part in 2 fatal confrontations on the Shapiro brothers. Irving Shapiro was struck on July 11th. Meyer Shapiro was struck on September 17th. These were meant to settle a score from previous incidents involving the Shapiros. Maione soon joined forces with Abe Kid Twist Reles, Martin Bugsy Goldstein, Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, and others. Together they formed Murder, Inc., a group hired by the National Crime Syndicate. Maione served as the Italian liaison to their Jewish partners. He was linked to at least a dozen slayings. In the mid-1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey targeted the group's boss, Louis Lepke Buchalter. In response, the squad began silencing informants. On May 11th, 1937, Maione, Abandando, and Strauss put loan shark George Whitey Rudnick to rest. According to Reles, as Rudnick was being stuffed into a car, he began to cough. Strauss drove an ice pick into him 63 times. Maione then brought down a meat cleaver on his skull. Why did Maione cross that line? Was it loyalty to Buchalter or fear of being exposed? In that world, orders were absolute. Informants had to be dealt with. By May 1940, Maione, Abandando, and Strauss faced charges for Rudnick's slaying. Maione denied taking part. He claimed to have been at his grandmother's wake. His brother and several witnesses backed him up, but Raylis stuck to his story. Other accomplices came forward to confirm his account. The first trial ended in a mistrial. Then, on May 23, 1940, Maione was convicted of first-degree slaying. He was given a capital sentence. He appealed the decision. In December 1940, the New York Court of Appeals overturned the verdict by a 4-3 vote. A second trial began on March 10, 1941. On March 20th, Maione lost his temper and hurled a glass of water at Raylis during testimony. The outburst shocked the courtroom. On April 3, 1941, Maione was found guilty again. On April 14th, he received another capital sentence. Further appeals failed. On January 8, 1942, the Court of Appeals upheld the sentence. Maione was set to face the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. He met that fate defiantly. On February 19, 1942, at age 33, his sentence was carried out in the electric chair at Sing Sing. Unlike some of his partners, no record of his final words survives. Sources note that Frank Abandando cursed guards and laughed before facing his own fate, but Maione's last words remain unknown. The next individual wasn't the leader, but he made the loudest statement. Michael DeWayne Smith was born in 1982 in Oklahoma. By his late teens, he had joined a local gang called the Oak Grove Posse. That group was known for petty theft, dealing, and aggressive street incidents. There's no record of anyone steering him toward a more positive path. He sank deeper into gang life as he grew older. In November 2001, Smith was suspected of a fatal shooting involving Otis Payne Jr., 26. That case never went to trial, but police listed him as a wanted person. On February 22, 2002, he was linked to 2 more fatal incidents in Oklahoma City. The first involved Janet Miller Moore, a 41-year-old mother. Early that morning, Smith forced his way into her apartment. He believed her son had informed on him. As she dressed, he shot her without warning. She had no chance to get away. Later the same day, he targeted Sarath Puluru, a 22-year-old student from India who worked as a store clerk. Puluru had spoken critically of the gang in a newspaper interview. Smith shot him and then set his body on fire. That act aimed to spread fear among others. During questioning, Smith admitted to both acts. He said he burned the second victim's body to send a message. He claimed the acts were revenge for the gang's disrespect. At trial on October 14, 2003, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree homicide, 1 count of second-degree homicide, theft, arson, and burglary. The jury imposed the harshest state penalty. He also received a life sentence plus 85 years behind bars and a $45,000 fine for the other charges. He spent more than 21 years under the state's most severe sentence. He filed multiple appeals, arguing he had intellectual challenges and that his statements were unfairly obtained. Courts rejected those arguments at every turn. In March of 2024, the state's clemency board denied his request for relief in a 4-1 vote. They pointed to his own admissions and other evidence linking him to the fatal acts. Prosecutors described him as ruthless and said his intellectual disability claim did not meet legal standards. Smith made a last appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court asking for a review of his confession. On April 4, 2024, the court refused. This cleared the way for the state to carry out its sentence. That same morning at 10:09 a.m., Smith received the state's harshest penalty at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister. Attending were the son and niece of his first victim. When asked if he had any final words, he said simply, "I'm good." He declined a final meal. The process lasted about 10 minutes. At 10:20 a.m., officials pronounced him gone. His spiritual advisor remained by his side and later shared that Smith whispered private words of love for his family. Up next is a 19-year-old, part of a gang and desperate to prove himself. Christopher Andre Vialva was born in 1980 in Killeen, Texas. His mother served in the Air Force and was white. His father was an African-American soldier from Trinidad who later faced a military trial. Their marriage ended in divorce, and Vialva grew up with his mother. Her family cut ties with her over the interracial marriage. Vialva often felt alone. His mother's later partners treated her badly. He struggled with feeling rejected and unsure of his place. In school, he was known as disruptive, but friends and teachers said he was not aggressive. By age 19, he joined a local gang called the 212 Piru Bloods. On June 21, 1999, Vialva and 4 other teenagers planned to steal money and valuables from Todd, 26, and Stacy, 28, a couple visiting from Iowa. The teens were 2 17-year-olds, 1 16-year-old, and 1 15-year-old. They met the couple at a Fort Hood gas station. They pretended to need a ride, then forced them into the car trunk with a gun. They drove around for hours. They used Stacy's card to take out cash. They took jewelry and even spent on fast food and cigarettes. Locked in the trunk, Todd and Stacy begged for help. They prayed and sang "Jesus Loves Me." Vialva wanted respect in the gang. He poured lighter fluid inside the trunk. Then he opened it and shot both in the head. Todd did not survive. Stacy lost her life from smoke after his partner set the car on fire. Their bodies were found later in a remote area, and the car was burned. Medical reports showed Todd's fatal wounds were from gunshots. Stacy most likely passed away from smoke inhalation, with bullet injuries making it worse. Vialva worked with Brandon Bernard on this plan. Bernard lit the fire. 3 other teens made deals and testified against Vialva for shorter sentences. The 15-year-old who provided the gun got 5 years in prison. In June 2000, Vialva stood trial in federal court in Texas. The jury found him and Bernard guilty of first-degree charges for carjacking that led to loss of life. They both received the harshest federal sentence. From 2002 to 2018, Vialva appealed without success. A national pause on federal sentences delayed the final step for years. In 2020, the Supreme Court refused to delay the procedure that ended his life. His lawyer argued that the focus on gang leadership had unfairly influenced an all-white jury. Vialva spent 20 years in the highest security unit at USP Terre Haute. He wrote letters to other inmates like Timothy McVeigh, Lesmond Mitchell, and Keith Nelson. While inside, he converted to Messianic Judaism. Shortly before his sentence was carried out, he recorded a video message. He said he felt deep regret for taking 2 precious lives. He called his actions a grave wrong and said he wished he could undo the harm. His final request was a simple Pizza Hut meal with no special sides. On the evening of September 24th, 2020, at 6:42 p.m. Eastern Time, his sentence was carried out. He offered a prayer and spoke to his mother in the witness room. He said, "Father, heal their hearts with grace and love." Then he added, "I am ready, Father." Records vary slightly in wording, but his main message stayed the same, a final plea for peace for the families. At age 40, Christopher Vialva became the first black person given this federal sentence since 2003, and the 7th person subjected to it since July 2020. The next man said he'd hurt anyone who got too close. Then he proved it. Charles Rodman Campbell was born in 1954 in Oahu, Hawaii. His father was a former Marine who struggled with drinking and often hurt Campbell's mother. These scenes shaped how Charles saw the world. By age 13, he had started using substances. He also stole and rebelled. He felt cut off from society. When he reached his mid-teens, his home life fell apart. At 16, his father called the police after Charles stole the family car. A year later, his mother called him a runaway and said she wished he had never come home. He began taking weapons from his grandparents and landed in a juvenile facility. Staff there described him as cold and said he warned he would harm anyone who got too close. He married in 1973, and a daughter arrived in March 1974, but troubling behavior followed. In June, he threw a butcher tool toward his crying baby. His marriage ended in August when his ex-wife took custody of their daughter. Campbell's first major act happened on December 11, 1974. He broke into a home in Clearview, Washington. He forced himself on the woman who lived there and held a sharp tool to her baby's throat. She managed to escape and later spoke against him in court. In 1976, he was found guilty of breaking in and inflicting serious harm. He received a long prison term. In 1981, while on work release, he broke rules and drank heavily. Despite these issues, the system returned him to society. No one warned the woman he had harmed that he would be back in her area. This was a major failure. On April 14, 1982, Campbell used his work release to return to Clearview. He went back into that house. Inside were the same woman, her 8-year-old daughter, and a neighbor. He slashed all of their throats, ending their lives. The woman was also beaten, suffocated, stripped, and mutilated. Both the daughter and the neighbor lost their lives from similar wounds. His actions showed both rage and careful planning. At his 1982 trial, prosecutors focused on his motive. Silencing people who had spoken against him, they showed witnesses who placed him near the house that day. They found the daughter's earrings and bracelet in his car. His fingerprints were on broken glass at the scene. A fellow work release participant guided police to more hidden items near a river. The jury noted many serious factors. He was on work release, he targeted witnesses, he acted to hide his identity, and it all took place during a break-in. No reason lessened his responsibility. He was given a sentence that would end his life. Over the next 12 years, Campbell appealed. Courts kept upholding his sentence. In 1985, the state's highest court set a date for the sentence, but it was paused for another appeal. Further petitions stretched the process until 1994. On May 27, 1994, the sentence was carried out at Walla Walla State Penitentiary. Campbell refused to leave his cell. Guards used pepper spray on him and tied him to a wooden board. They covered his head, placed a noose around his neck, and moved him through the hallways. 90 seconds later, the hood and noose were secured and a trapdoor opened. His life ended instantly. The next man picked the firing squad. But what happened shocked even the guards. Mikal Deen Mahdi was born in 1983. He grew up in Lawrenceville, Virginia. His father, Sharif, had a troubled past. Sharif struggled with heavy drinking and often clashed with the police. He married a 16-year-old when he was 27. Mikal's mother left the family when he was 3. At age 8, Mikal moved to Maryland. He went to live with an uncle and aunt. He started at Scotts Branch Elementary in Baltimore. School was hard for him. He felt bad about himself. He read below his grade level. He often spoke back to teachers. He left school after 3rd grade. When he was 9, doctors diagnosed him with severe depression. In 1992, he threatened to harm himself. He spent some time in a psychiatric hospital. After that, he returned to Virginia. He lived again with his father and brother. By 1997, Mikal had his first conviction. He entered buildings without permission and took items that did not belong to him. He later earned his GED. By 2004, he was attending community college. In the same period, he grew more aggressive. In July 2004, he went on a 3-day spree across Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. It began after an illegal substance deal in Brunswick County, Virginia, went wrong. He took a man's life that day. He was never charged for that act. 2 days later, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, he entered a convenience store with a weapon. There, he shot the 29-year-old clerk twice in the head, ending their life. On July 17th or 18th, he drove to Columbia, South Carolina. There, he forced a man out of his car at gunpoint and drove off with it. He then went to a farm in Calhoun County. He waited there for an off-duty public safety captain named James Myers. He shot Myers at least 8 times. He poured diesel over the body and set it on fire. Mahdi fled the region. On July 21, 2004, police arrested him in Florida. He was driving the officer's unmarked truck. He went back to South Carolina for trial. In 2006, a jury found him guilty in Myers' case. The judge gave him a penalty that would end his life. His lawyers spoke of his harsh childhood. Prosecutors pointed out his long record of aggressive behavior. In 2011, North Carolina courts found him responsible for the Winston-Salem clerk's case. He received life in prison with no chance of release. From 2024 into early 2025, he challenged his sentences. He said his lawyers did not do enough. He said his early life troubles were not shared well in court. On April 7, 2025, South Carolina's highest court denied his appeal. Hours before his planned penalty, the U.S. Supreme Court also refused to hear his case. The governor declined to grant any mercy. He had 3 ways to face the final penalty: an injection, an electric chair, or a firing squad. He asked for the firing squad. He said he feared the other 2 options would be more painful. On April 11, 2025, at Broad River Correctional in Columbia, South Carolina, he faced the squad. He sat in a metal chair and wore a hood. A target sat over his chest. He did not speak. He took a few deep breaths before 6:01 p.m., then he cried out as 3 officers fired. His last meal was medium-cooked ribeye steak, mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake, and sweet tea. Officials first said his passing was quick. In May, his lawyers shared an outside report. It said only 2 bullets hit him. Neither seemed to hit his heart. Both likely lodged in his liver or other organs. The report said he felt pain for 30 to 60 seconds. Witnesses heard him groan twice after the shots. They said he took one last breath 80 seconds later. This raised questions about the firing squad method. South Carolina's court had said worst-case pain would end in 10 to 15 seconds. His case showed it could take much longer. His attorneys called the process mishandled and extremely harsh.